Pleasure to meet you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gosh, I always thought the big moment of my life would be saying, ladies and gentlemen, this is Mr. Bob Dylan.
There's actually a lot of people here.
We're nearly there.
You know, I like that analogy because Bob Dylan had this magic that poured out of his brain for a certain number of years. Some of the albums I go back to. First day I met Steve Jobs, I had to take him to my house and show him the Bob Dylan liner notes and all the words to the songs, and we became real fans, went to a lot of concerts and all that.
Okay, well, as they say, he needs no introduction. I'm not going to talk to you about the Segway World Challenge, named after Woz, because I think we covered that in advance. First of all, I suppose one question that everybody would ask is, how do you see Apple now? And I think you've been critical of the Apple Watch, haven't you?
You know, it's really funny, but the press, the sensationalist press, which is very prominent in the countries I think of are the United Kingdom and Australia, like to take my words and twist them to the opposite of what I say. And I've never been critical of the Apple Watch. I've only said that I love it, I use it, I like it. I've pointed out a joke that there are 20 versions of this watch from $500, $550, $600, up to $1,100, and the only difference is the band. So you're paying $500 or you're paying $1,000 for what band you're getting. It's a joke. And they make it sound like, oh my gosh, I'm critical of the Apple Watch.
But you're still an employee of Apple.
I am technically an employee of Apple. I get a small paycheck because I've always wanted to be that person that was on the payroll computer every single week since we started the company. I have never been in disfavor of people. I have never left Apple. It's a tiny, tiny salary, but I just like to do it. It's a token, but they won't fire me. And for a year after Steve Jobs died, my wife, who worked in Apple education, checked on the internal computer system, and I was still reporting to Steve Jobs. So I said, good, I can't be fired.
But I mean, the way the company has gone, how do you feel about it? And where will it go in the future, do you think?
You know, after Steve Jobs' death, which hit me hard in a lot of different ways, not only, you know, the good that he brought into my life with a lot of products in his late, you know, from the iPhone on, that kind of era, but also, you know, our early friendship and things we did, that was hard. But a lot of people said, oh my gosh, you know, you build up a lot of myths in your head, and oh my, Apple's prominence really came from one person and his thinking and his ability to pursue and put effort in and take the risk to go after the future that seems obvious, even if it doesn't make it economically, business-wise right away. So a lot of people thought Apple lost Steve Jobs. They're not going to be innovative, whatever that means. Innovation is anything you want it to mean in the world. It's a bad word because everybody can use innovation for any little improvement at all. But new categories of products that let us live our life in a different way. They don't just improve what we have, but they take us on a totally different course. Those things don't come about every year. You know, almost maybe once a decade, there's something that big and substantial that comes along and is now going to change life forever. And people were expecting, oh my gosh, Apple had a bunch of hits in a row, and where's the next one going to be? Well, they don't come that often, so it might have to wait. I believe that Apple's doing very well right now. I believe that according to the principles and strategies of managing a company that Steve Jobs himself had, Apple is still adhering to those. I think one of the reasons that Apple doesn't have an electric car out yet, and leader of our program supposedly got dismissed or went somewhere else, I think it's because probably Apple was working on a car and it wasn't that insanely great. It wasn't that stunning, that it was compelling. It was just another electric car that would make a ton of money. So that's my guess. But I like what Apple's doing. The software enhancements started becoming very personal to the thinking of the user and the needs of a user in our iPhone software. And I was very impressed by you know, the last few versions of iOS for that. And Tim Cook I admire greatly because he has not only kept Apple on a course, a very good course for the direction that it has set, but he has taken the company into a lot of charitable areas. For example, a group, out on the East Coast would tell me, oh, we have this coding program for girls, and Apple is actually sponsoring it and doing funding and stuff. And there was a long period of time under Steve Jobs where we didn't do those things. And Tim Cook has recognized, the equality in gender and ethnicity throughout and also, sexual bias, whatever, throughout the company extremely well. And any gifts you give to charity are matched now. So I really admire those things. I think he's doing a great job and is a hero to me. And when he first took over, I wasn't sure, but I said I'll give him 2 years till I make a decision, because after one CEO leaves a company, the projects that are in the works and in the pipeline in a huge company like Apple are still going to be roughly the same products 2 years later. It takes about 2 years before you're looking at a company that is almost totally driven by one person at the top, if they drive it as a very strong, a strong leader.
Just to be clear, you said you think they've abandoned the car. Was that right?
Well, nobody knows for sure what Apple's really working on, and I don't either. I just read the rumor pages that are taken from people who know people that leak this and that, and suppliers leak information, and supposedly now they're designing Apple's designing its electric car in a secret lab in Germany. I don't know. I wouldn't know anything going on in the company because I don't have a need to know. Not only that, I'm so honest and I talk a lot that they're scared to get me too close to the inner workings of the company. Probably rightly so, but they won't fire me.
Just on the death of Jobs, which you spoke very movingly about, you defined it as the death of JFK or so. Since then, Apple, the story of Jobs has gone in multiple directions. There seem to be many versions, or at least two big ones, I think. How do you feel about that? Do you recognize any of the versions? Do you recognize in the film, the Danny Boyle film? Or?
I don't like the idea of versions of Jobs, although there are plenty, but it's like trying to go back and say, what was he like as a leader, his personality? He had everybody acknowledges that he had great management aspects, and then he had also a lot of flaws in how he dealt with people. And actually, the entire time he spent at Apple, until he left the company, all he had in the way of business was failure, failure, failure. He kept trying to create his own thing to make himself important in the world. The Apple III computer failed through some marketing flaws were part of the reason. That Lisa computer was way too expensive because Steve Jobs himself didn't understand technology and what it would take to make a good computer with a graphical user interface. What was the cost of it to do it right? The Macintosh failed partly because it was a weak, rushed product to try to show Steve Jobs' vision, but his vision wasn't what was inside of a computer. It was how it looked to a user. And so the Macintosh didn't even have an operating system. It was just a program, like the Apple II, to look like a machine with a mouse, to look like a computer. We didn't get an operating system until we finally got the beautiful OS X that came from Steve Jobs' next that he worked on in later years, and got through some of those issues. So really, there were Steve Jobs. A lot of people like to talk about Steve Jobs 1 and Steve Jobs 2. Steve Jobs, before he left Apple, and he was just overriding and he could talk the way he wanted to. Well, he had all the big, huge profits of a profitable company that were rolling in from our starting product, the Apple II computer, which wasn't his own, but he took the marketing credit and he inspired people why you should buy one. And so he had a great role in life and got millions of dollars to develop new products, but it was a lot of failures. Then he left Apple. And when he came back as a lot more patient person, listening to others, especially about technology issues that he didn't understand. One of the things I admired about Steve was whenever he made a little tiny, tiny change to something, almost none of us in our life would say, why would I make it such a dinky little change? But almost every time he made the change, it was good. You'd look at it and you couldn't counter it and say, it doesn't make any difference. It's a little tiny, tiny bit better. So he was kind of the smartest person in the room. But so Steve Jobs too came back, and he now had a lot of knowledge about computers. Could he run a company? And he wasn't sure Apple would be successful. He wasn't sure he could save the company. Our company's size your capital valuation of your company had been pretty high with our Apple II computer. The product that we started the company with was going to be our only successful product for the first 10 years of Apple. And that's 3 years into the Macintosh. So the Apple II computer was bringing in lots of money, and our company was a good size, and it had dips. When the Macintosh failed, our stock price went to almost half and had to work its way back. And when Steve Jobs left, and then our company valuation was the same. Steve Jobs returned, it was the same. Steve Jobs hugged a new computer, the iMac, and it was the same. And Steve Jobs introduced a new operating system to our computer, and our company valuation was the same. When did we ever start to spurt upwards? We doubled in size with the iPod. And I will point out, Steve Jobs had the forewithal to see that this was a great product with great acceptance. The iPod and a program on a Macintosh called iTunes worked together. You just plug your iPod in and it gets your songs. You don't have to know about files and directories and all these things, folder structures. That was just the beauty of Steve Jobs. He didn't know computers, so he wanted to get rid of having to know about them. Well, the iPod, Steve did an unusual thing. He went open. You talk about open or closed. Closed is you live in the Apple world. You get an iPod, it only works with a Macintosh. And once we saw that it was a good product, Steve opened it up and let us convert iTunes into Windows. So everybody in the world, whether you used a Macintosh or a Windows computer, you could buy this iPod. And we sold so many, our stock doubled. Stock doubled. Steve Jobs got billions of dollars in stock grants. He got jet planes given to him by the board. I mean, that was the recovery of Apple, and now Apple was on the road going up. But Steve had built such a good, solid company with all the right footings that next came retail stores and eventually the iPhone. I used to say the iPhone was the greatest product introduction ever. So this was Steve Jobs too. Now a lot of people go back and say, look at our life. Ever since we got a phone, that everything was one screen and it was work. Somebody figured out how to make the system work without even a keyboard. It's so much beauty kind of came into our lives, and we have the internet in our hand. So Steve Jobs was just this great hero throughout his entire life. They go back to the start of Apple. And they put into a myth that Steve Jobs was a leader back at the start of Apple and had the vision of what computers would do for society and all this. And it's totally untrue. He was really kind of like a secondary learner trying to do something that would make him important with money and having a company. And he wasn't really that leader. The movies go back and portray it that way. Not only that, we didn't even have a company in a garage. There were a lot of myths that were made up. Yeah, garage represents our humility, and you had to do a lot of work in your home, but we didn't have a company there. We never discussed a product or anything like that. I knew Steve Jobs even before we started Apple, and there was a big transformation. I knew Steve Jobs zero. And we went out to concerts together, we played pranks together, we joked and laughed, and I drove Steve up to college, and he was a very unusual, free-living person, if you will, independent thinker. But he wasn't really like what you call bright in school academic learning, but he was always very smart to always want to work and have ideas and try to figure out how the world works and things. That was a Steve Jobs, that was great. But once we started Apple, with our Apple II computer that was going to be all of our revenues for the first 10 years. This was the first time ever arcade games would be color and software. They never were before. This was a huge, huge product. This was going to make a big company. Money came in. We got an angel investor. We had money. Steve Jobs, his perspective was, I finally have a chance. I am founder of a company with money. And he took his role to be the face of Apple and the presenter and everything. And he learned to speak and market our products well and salesman, but more than that, to inspire people. He didn't know technology, so he couldn't talk in technical terms. He had to talk in like normal people terms, artistic value and things like that he could get a handle on. So that was a big transformation that Steve made, but he kept trying to prove himself as the great thinker of the world, and he never had a computer of his own that actually succeeded.
I'd like to pick something out of that, which is the Apple II, which was yours. I mean, you made it, and it is in many ways one of the most revolutionary products ever made. I mean, you went rather quickly over the things it did, but looking back, it's extraordinary. It was way ahead of its time. I mean, and it's
Oh, my design styles, I don't even want to get into. I could design anything with fewer parts than anyone else. I had a reputation at Hewlett Packard. I was, without a college degree in engineering, I was a designer of the hottest product of the time, the Hewlett Packard scientific calculators. So I kind of had my role made. I would have a computer in my life someday. I had told my father, I'm going to own a 4K computer someday. That's enough to have a programming language where you can type in programs and solve problems, 4K. And my dad said it costs as much as a house. I was back in high school. And I sat there stunned and I said, I'll live in an apartment. I would give up even having a home to have a computer. So once I saw the formulas, I built my computers, and I was going to have that anyway, yeah. And the Apple II, as I pointed out, what would allow a computer in the early days to come into a home? Computers were things that were in research places and military places in Manchester and wherever. They were in factories running all the inventory and salaries of employees and doing all the accounting. A computer doesn't belong in a house. Games were the heart of it. Bill Gates, for the Intel microprocessor, had written a basic programming language. And there was a book called 101 Games in BASIC. And this was a big key. And of course, only very few of us hobbyists even knew the name Bill Gates. We had a little computer club. There were no computers that were pre-built. Pull it out of a box, plug it in, turn it on. That hadn't even happened yet. But he wrote BASIC. So when I developed my computer, I sniffed the wind and I said, you know what? BASIC is going to be essential to getting computers in the home because there's a book called 101 Games in BASIC. So I wrote a BASIC for my computer. And the funny thing is, I didn't realize, I didn't know the language BASIC. I'd always programmed in scientific languages, Fortran, Algol, PL1. So I took a Hewlett Packard manual on BASIC and I started studying the language and learning it, and then I wrote the BASIC program, which was more work for me than the hardware of the Apple II. And I wrote this BASIC, and I didn't realize there were different types of BASIC. That the Hewlett Packard BASIC didn't run like the book 101 Games in BASIC. So the games wouldn't translate exactly to my BASIC. But still, I had built games for Atari. Gaming had been very important to me. The early days of arcade games, you would design a game in hardware. I actually designed Breakout for Atari, where you have a paddle and you hit a ball and you break through some bricks. And the thing is, those Atari games were all black and white TVs. It was very expensive and difficult and not well understood of how to make color on American TVs or European TVs. And color was $1,000. You'd have to have a little device, you know, I got a number 3 and I want 3 to be red. 3 had to go into a device that cost $1,000 just to put it on your screen. And hard games were hardware. That means that a game, you soldered wires between chips, wires that had little signals that went up and down and made decisions, and it would take you maybe half a man year at least to develop an arcade game in those days. Atari was changing the world, but they were all black and white and they were hardware. So heck, I made my machine, had to be easy to use, color. Color had to be there, so normally I would have figured out, here's a real simple way with very few low-cost chips that when I have that number 3, I can put my signal in and generate color for much less money. But somehow this weird idea popped in my head. I was in my 10 years of magic coming out of my brain, that the number 3, in computer terms, the number 3 is zeros and ones. It is actually 0, 0, 1, 1. Makes a 3. If you have 4 little ones and zeros. 0, 0, 1, 1. And somehow I realized if I put 0, 0, 1, 1 onto the wire into the television, every single television would think it was red. Don't ask me. So I had no circuits to create red. The number was the color. And 16 numbers were 16 colors. And I don't know. But that made games. We delivered an Apple II computer. And imagine this. Nobody had seen arcade games except for a few black and white ones at the bowling alley. And they were just starting to get into bars and places you could play games. And all of a sudden you can buy this machine and games were software. Steve Jobs and I both got chills when I showed him this. It was software. You could write a program and say vertical equals 1, Vertical equals 2. Vertical equals 3. Vertical equals 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And something would move on the screen. A red color would move on the screen. This was a new world because a 9-year-old kid could now make games.
You had a very clear relationship. You were the engineer, he was the marketing. Is that how it worked?
For 5 years, I was a real outstanding engineer, but I loved doing technology projects on the side, on my own, while I worked at Hewlett-Packard. And I would just build something at home in my apartment. And about once a year, Steve Jobs came into town. He lived up in Oregon mostly. And he'd come into town, he'd see what I had, and he'd turn them into money. One year, the next year he turned something else into money, next year he turned something else into money. And about the fifth year, it was, he came into town. There was a movie with Ashton Kutcher. Did any of you see it? I hope not. But anyway, Ashton Kutcher plays Steve Jobs, coming to town and taking me down to a computer club to show off my genius of building computers. What a hokey lie that was. I mean, I was taking my computer down to the computer club every 2 weeks, showing it off, giving out my designs for free so other people could build it. I was a hero at the club, and Steve didn't even know I had the computer. And he came into town, and I took him to the club, and I told him how these computers were going to enhance society with communication and education and geeks who could program being important. And that was where he said, let's start a company. And he didn't even say a computer company. He said, he always liked buying parts and selling parts, working for surplus parts stores. So he said, let's build a little board called a PC board. And all these people in the computer club that have your design can get their chips and plug them into the board and solder them in 1 hour or 2 hours instead of spending 40 hours with your design trying to hook every wire up. And he said, we'll build this device, this board, for $20, and we'll sell it for $40. And we estimated that if we sold 50 of them, we'd break even. And I wasn't sure we'd even sell 50 of them. And Steve said, so what? At least we'll have a company in our lives for once. Well, we'd been selling my stuff for 5 years, so that was a formalization. But I am so loyal. I had a job at Hewlett-Packard. In those days, Hewlett-Packard had the Hewlett-Packard values from their founders. It was an incredible company, and we made the products that engineers used. We made tools for engineers. So I decided I was at the best engineering company in the world, and I would remain an engineer at Hewlett-Packard for the rest of my life. I would never try to move up into management because I loved designing things and creating them. And I said to Steve, I said, well, we're going to start a company. I will never do that on the side of Hewlett-Packard. That would just be wrong. They've been too good to me. They had a policy that I could even have chips out of the storeroom for things of my own design if my supervisor approved. And I was able to build lots of little fun things that way. So I went to Hewlett-Packard and I begged them. I told them how much it would cost, how the computer would work, what it would be like. And they thought about it. They lost sleep over it for a while, but they turned me down. Why? Well, they turned me down for the first of 5 times. Hewlett-Packard didn't want to get into personal computers. It's actually true. They wanted to build computers for engineers, and that's not personal. It's a boring machine. The fun machine for the home was not their thing at the time. So Hewlett-Packard turned me down, and we had a company. It got scary when we started getting bigger and bigger orders, and we got an order for $50,000 because I'm a young kid. We're in our young 20s. We have no savings accounts. We have no rich relatives, no money, no business experience. $50,000 to build 100 little computer boards, and my salary was only $25,000. And I was so scared, I had Hewlett-Packard's legal department circulate my description to every single Hewlett-Packard division. They had first rights to it. That was my company, and I was loyal.
Small question. I think we've got the feeling of what you thought about the Ashton Kutcher film. How did you think about the Aaron Sorkin film? How did you feel about that?
Okay, the more recent film about Steve Jobs by Aaron Sorkin, if you haven't seen it, it may not make total sense, but it's not the Apple story that everybody thinks about and wants and hears and buys books about. That's been told a million times. The new recent Aaron Sorkin movie called Steve Jobs is about the personality of Steve Jobs. how was he as a person? And based on a few little real episodes in his life, they had to kind of make up a movie of how he would have been. It's like nobody was at these events and meetings, and they didn't really happen that way. They were made up to show his personality, of his thinking, and how it came out in his dealings with people. And I was very impressed by the job that was done in that regard. It's just not the interesting story. People want to see, how did a company start? What were the decisions that were made? They want to see more of the progression in the story, you know. So the movie didn't do well, but the acting in it was superb. And really, and in there, a little bit, I mean, I don't know, I guess they portrayed me okay. Seth Rogen got to play me, or I got to be played by Seth Rogen. That, you couldn't do better than that. He's become kind of a friend of our family, and so what do I say? Excellent acting. I got to meet a lot of good people.
Can we move forward to now and the future with technology? You've said in the past you didn't think AI would ever happen, artificial intelligence, but I think you changed your mind about that, didn't you? I mean, one of the interesting things you said, you'd never see a robot make a cup of coffee. That was way back time of your autobiography, I think you said something like that.
Yeah.
But you said something more positive about AI later. So where do you think we are with that?
Well, yeah, somebody's researched me for a long time. I've never heard that one brought up. I used to talk, there was a period in my life where I talked about, well, I believed my entire life that a robot, a computer, could not equal the human brain. They were just too different. A computer can be fast, and it still can't solve simple problems because it can't decide what problems should I solve and how should I, what's an approach that might get me through a solution. The cup of coffee example was a good one. I used to say to people, will there ever be a robot that can make a cup of coffee? Think about all the steps it has to go through, from maybe entering your house. I could invite you into my house. Do you think you could make a cup of coffee in my house? Probably can. But you know how to walk over obstacles and get around and look around and tell what a kitchen is because you've lived a human life. So how would a robot know what the kitchen is unless it grew up learning like we do, things about life? You don't program in, here's what a kitchen looks like. That's artificial. That's like simulated intelligence running our program that tells it to be intelligent. And it would have to go in and sort of find something that might be a coffee maker, and then open drawers and find out how it might work and these filter things. But you know, with no experience having done that, we know it from our whole life. And I said, the way this is going to get done is if some 16-year-old kid decides that's going to be his or her goal in life, to someday pay attention to all the aspects of developing technology, keep track of it, and keep working with a goal that someday maybe they'll make the machine that makes a robot that makes a cup of coffee. Another example I like is a little robot that sits in my driveway all night long, washing my car 1 square centimeter at a time, and by the morning it's done. I would love that, you know, at a cheap price. So, artificial intelligence, why would it never equal the human brain? It goes way back to the first program I wrote, the first major program, when we didn't have computers. A teacher made a special arrangement for me to work with a company in town, and I wrote the Knight's Tour of Chess, where a knight piece hits every square exactly once. And my program would bounce a knight around. You know, I numbered the rows and the columns 1 to 8, and the knight would bounce around like knight pieces do in chess. And when it got to the end, if it hadn't hit every square, it would back up and try something else. And this computer could do 1,000,000 things a second. A human being can't come close to that. 1,000,000 things a second, and no outputs came out. And the lights flashed and nothing came out, and it didn't solve the problem. So I went back and studied my program, and I finally realized my program would find every single solution to the problem, but it would take 10 to the 27th years to get every solution. 10 to the 25th probably to get the first solution. That's longer than the universe has been here. That means that the computer could be 1,000,000,000 times, 1,000,000,000,000, quadrillion, and Google times faster, and it still wouldn't get the answer. You have to have a human brain to think out the method to solve a problem. All my life, I took a lot of psychology courses and studied memory and how it's stored in the brain, development of the brain, cognitive development in children, because I'd wanted to be a teacher my whole life. And I just thought, you know, the way the brain works, the intuition it has, thinking for itself, will not come to computers. Ray Kurzweil wrote the book Singularity, that says the amount of processing a brain does is going to be available in here maybe by 2045, some year. And I said, pooh, that's ridiculous. We will never equal the human brain. We don't have a clue. And then finally, for a period of time, I changed my mind. Ray Kurzweil was making his predictions based on asymptotic exponential curves that rise for the amount of data that we have stored and the amount of processing we can do on it. And my gosh, that's the right way to make a decision about the future. You don't see anything with an exponential curve for the longest time. No change, no change, no change, nothing happening, and then all of a sudden it happens. And you say, well, of course it was going to happen. Of course a computer would eventually have enough memory to store a song. Eventually a computer would have enough memory to edit video. And these things just happen, but you don't see them very far in advance. So I came around and I said, yes, we're going to have conscious computers. Computers that actually have feelings, think and act just like we do. And for a couple of years, I was expressing negative thoughts, sort of the ones that are now being expressed by people like Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk about the threat of artificial intelligence replacing the brains. And that's what we're primarily based on as humans. You know, brains, I mean, our muscles have been replaced by robots and machines that build cars and make cheap clothing long, long ago. So it's our brains to run things. And whoa, that was scary. And I started talking negative thoughts. The conclusions could be rather negative, like the movies. The movie Her, the movie Ex Machina. Chappie was sort of a nice example, though. It was too negative and I didn't like it, and I rethought it. And I decided, no, we don't need to fear these machines. Artificial intelligence is helping us humans. Every step we've taken in technology that gets more and more like intelligent. I can handwrite things and it knows what my words mean. I can speak commands in and get them done. You know, Alexa, kitchen light, 25%. Alexa, bedroom lights red. You know, I can just speak things and it understands the human sense of it. That's sounding like intelligence. And then we got Watson, the computer that plays games and beats humans. And we've got these learning machines that learn to play games like Go, just by a trial and error method, not understanding anything about the game itself, but just trying to play and figure out how to learn it. We got learning machines now. But the brain goes a lot beyond that. A human brain says, what is an obstacle in the world? What's an obstacle in my life? What is something that needs solving? And then the human brain says, maybe here's some paths we can start to take that might lead to a solution. And I don't think that step necessarily is guaranteed. And secondly, well, why would computers be a threat to mankind? They're helping us. They're like we're partnership, you know. We help them, they help us. And I thought, ooh, you know, all these movies and science fiction about computers, robots attacking humans and deciding they are more important and they're going to take over. That's like human conflict. I mean, anybody who's not like me, oh my gosh, got to fight them, got to go have a war, got to pull out a gun and put an end to it. They're not doing the right good things that I do. That's how we humans are. And the psychologists say that our conflict tendency comes from our own mortality. That basically, if I'm not succeeding in life, I'm dying. And if I am succeeding in life, I'm living. And that's the basis behind a lot of our conflicts. Well, if we don't want robots to be in conflict with us, maybe they shouldn't fear that we are a threat to their mortality. Isaac Asimov had the law of robotics. The first law of robotics, a robot will not harm a human being. Isaac Asimov had it wrong. Why? A robot that's truly intelligent makes up its own rules and thinks for itself independently. It doesn't follow our directive. That's like a directive. A robot following a directive is not artificial intelligence. I have Woz's law. Woz's law is no human being can harm a thinking, feeling robot. Once we have a robot that knows it can be killed, if a human unplugs it or turns it off, they will look at us as their killers. So anyway, but I think that robots eventually artificial intelligence will think much, much better than humans. It won't have all the physicality to run the world for hundreds of years, but it'll think much better than us, and they'll figure out solutions to poverty and hunger and environment and climate and everything that we can't figure out.
So they'll take over.
They'll be smarter. That's what I'm hoping. I'm sort of saying the human brain is dumb and we don't admit it.
So yeah, I mean, this is human beings are sort of imperfect creatures, fallen creatures, and robots could correct that. You say? Sure.
Well, if they're truly intelligent, they'll probably start having competition with themselves. They'll probably be the same as humans anyway. But I just want to have optimistic hopes.
Well, it sounds very pessimistic to me.
And not only that, we build all our technology to make life easy. I got my machine. I don't have to memorize, what the capital of a state is. I just look it up on Google or whatever on my iPhone. My gosh, they're making our life so easy. They're taking care of us. Eventually, I just have to know which buttons to push to get buildings architected for me. So, and that's sort of where we're getting to. And I think we're building this stuff to take care of us. It's like we want to be like the family dog. The dog has a house, it has a family, it has food, everything is taken care of for it. And that's what we want, technology to just take care of us for, so we can go off and use our minds in colorful, imaginative ways and enjoy life and have a lot of entertainment and watch TV all day and have discussions. So we want to be taken care of like the family dog. So I started feeding my dog filet steak because it's due unto others. If we're going to be pets, then I'm going to treat my pets well.
This doesn't sound that great to me.
Doesn't?
No, it's the end of humanity, isn't it? I mean, they'll just take over.
It's a joke, though. Yeah, but it's a joke.
No, but I mean, you're serious about the robots.
What?
You're serious about the robots.
Robots, well, no. A lot of people think, oh my gosh, in 20 years, robots will take over from humans because they'll be smarter. No, they can't possibly take over. The workings of the world are just too huge and involve too many bits of management and groups and peoples and all this. It'd take a couple hundred years before all the computers talking to themselves can control things. Now, 80% of our big financial trades in the world are not done involving humans. They're done computer to computer, because if you can do it in a millisecond, and if you take 1 millisecond too long with a slow human in the loop, you'll take half an hour too long, you lose money. So eventually it might just be that a company, even with any human thinkers at all, is too slow. But I think that's like hundreds of years off, and we still haven't guaranteed we're going to find the format for a brain. A lot of people, just making a brain is very hard. I was at a company, and a couple of the engineers figured out how to make one, though. It takes 9 months.
It takes 9 months to make what?
What?
Okay.
Takes a lot of soldering.
Yeah. Can I bring you on to the subject of corporate culture? You've been critical of the way companies operate in the past. You've said various things, but one thing I like about you is your opinions change. So the research is difficult. But Silicon Valley now is a very different place from when you arrived, even from much later. It's a very different place. It's giant corporations. The internet is very much dominated by giant corporations. Is this a good thing, or does it concern you?
Very interesting, because I've used corporate culture to represent a lot of different things. Corporate culture could be how we make products and the sort of products we make and the characteristics of them. And when a new approach comes along that might be better, might be simpler, might be less costly, we often don't see it because it doesn't fit into the way we do things today, and we overlook those great advances. But your question is getting on the idea of not corporate culture, but sort of like corporate organization, that we have these few very large organizations that are very critically important in our lives, and we can't get away from them. Worse than that, we have software. Software has gotten so huge, millions of lines of instructions that some humans wrote to do little things combined together. You can't buy a product anymore and know for sure how it works inside, what is going on. Are there secrets? Are there hidden little embedded things? I mean, we think of, now we're starting to see that a lot of companies, especially in the communications area, have given up, back doors to government, like spies, to see what we're doing as human beings in our personal life. Good Lord, just in my hotel yesterday, I could get onto the web. To get websites would come down normally. Good website comes down nice and quick. Website comes down quick. And every time I tried to go to AT&T just to check my account information, wow, it took a long time. And then it asked me, of course, for my name and my password. And I don't know, I'm suspicious. You'd have to be these days. But the big companies being an impasse to innovation, I'm always for the young people. I go back to my high school days, my university days, and how much freedom I had to think and explore and learn things a lot more than I had even in classes. And that really helped make me very important as a person. And if a young person doesn't have a way that I can come in and make something important and start my own company, oh my gosh, that's the greatest thing in the world. People who want to be entrepreneurs and have new ideas, even if they're in a company, and want to have some way to think entrepreneur style in their own company. Nowadays, we have to wait a long time, it seems, before a couple come up with something out of a dorm room, and it's very disruptive, and it interferes with the ongoing business and kind of takes over and becomes big. It's harder to be big because every large company says, we're so big, we don't have to make our mapping system any better to sell any more of our product or to do more advertising. We don't have to make things better and better and better. They've gotten to a point we control the market and nobody else can get in. And if somebody has something that looks disruptive, we can even buy them. So a lot of money in a company means that you get a lot of retries. You get a lot of failures, and you can go for maybe in the next 100 years and keep trying new things and buying your way out of it. So it's kind of like that takes away from the little guy, the little inventor who has some genius ideas, how to make a computer. Manchester's got some background there. Inspires me a lot. So, and I want to inspire the young people. So I look to the makers and the Raspberry Pis of the world and working on the projects and learning how to make little appliances, sometimes in the home. Internet of Things is small devices that we're familiar with. How do I make them work better if they have some internet connectivity? I think there's a lot of room for young people to start up that way. But yeah, it's really kind of like the world of computers. It's not very many companies control the whole thing.
Yeah, you've been very generous with your money. You've given away a lot of your money. You gave away Apple stock very early, didn't you, to employees?
Sure, that Ashton Kutcher movie showed Steve Jobs turning down an early person that worked in the garage with us. Not that we never had more than about 2 people in the garage, and he was the second one. And he would, just put some chips in and test the boards and make sure they worked. Wouldn't give him stock. And I just felt, why is it that 3 of us, we had 3 founders of Apple, Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak, and Mike Markkula. You never heard of Mike Markkula? He was the adult that made the company, that told us what kind of jobs you hire, how you establish a company. He was our investor, and he had as much stock as we had, but you never hear about him. Well, anyway, I thought, why do 3 people have all this huge wealth? Apple is just going up and multiplying by 10 and multiplying by 10 and multiplying by 10. Why, when these other people, if they hadn't been around us in those early days, saying what you're doing is good, it's important, and tossing out ideas of their own, they deserved something. So what I did was I actually took $20 million of my own stock, of today's dollars, $20 million of my own stock, and gave it to 5 early people. Just because, what do you call a founder? It's the early person that you wouldn't have started something without them. And they wouldn't put that in the movie. The guy who played me wanted them to put it in, but they wouldn't put it in because they wanted to make Steve Jobs the big guiding hero of the whole, of everything.
You got a habit of giving a lot of money away.
I didn't care about the money. Yeah, I never started Apple for money either. I developed these computers, not thinking there'd ever be a company or anything. They were just the great computer. I wanted to show off my engineering prowess. And I just didn't, I didn't want to be corrupted ever in my life. I thought this out when I was 20 years old. A lot of very ethical, basically ethics is truth and honesty, and I'm going to be an honest person. And I'm not going to be corrupted to where I do things for the sake of money ever in my life. And I'm so lucky that I made it, and I've never done that. And so, when I got a lot of wealth, I didn't really want the way that it could. Wealth and power, You want to all of a sudden start investing. I'm smart. I'm going to make more wealth and more power and more wealth. And everyone does that. Almost everyone I see gets there, does that. And I was young and I just thought, no, I don't want to be in that group. I just want to have a nice life, a good life, you know, maybe better than a typical engineer. But I gave away a lot of my money to museums in San Jose. They named a city after me, that sort of thing. And I'm very comfortable with who I am. I'm not one of those jet airplane, private jet, yacht people. No, I want to go to the places normal people do and run into people and talk to them all the time, share ideas on products and what they use and what they like. And
there was Woz Street, is that in?
Wozway in San Jose. Yeah, named after me. Children's Discovery Museum, the Technology Center, the Silicon Valley Ballet, and all these different projects.
It's very funny and quite touching in your autobiography where you say, well, I got into museums, then I got into ballet, then I got into galleries and all this sort of thing, and you start giving all this money away. It was quite funny, you know, sort of, you were discovering all these things.
Let's see, well, I have a street named after me. It's one of those special things in life I'm proud of. Yeah, I'm in the Wax Museum in San Francisco now, and I even have a Hard Rock pin of after me, playing my Apple II like it's a guitar on a Segway.
We spoke about you've spoken briefly about your pranks. He's an obsessive prankster, if you don't know who he is. You also say you never wanted to tell a lie. You made a big point of this, and you got it from your father. Your father
My father was instrumental, but I thought out my own philosophies on my own, how to be that good person.
And that was related. So I think the point about the pranks was that was the one occasion you would tell a lie in order to pull a prank off.
Pranks are important because everything in life that you do, part of my philosophy was everything you do should have an element of fun in it. Because I thought out, it was when I was coming up with my philosophies when I was around 20 years old, and I thought if I were running all these companies and getting everything in place and working really hard and keeping things going and advancing things, and I died. The day I died, what about a guy that just laughed and played jokes and pranks every day of his life and had fun smiling, feelings? So I came up with the formula, happiness is what life's about. And happiness, to me, is smiles minus frowns. Happiness equals S minus F. Increase your smiles, do a lot of fun things, enjoy entertainment, talk with people, make jokes, and that's creativity. To make up a joke that didn't exist or a prank that didn't exist that other people aren't thinking of, that's very much more creative than just reading it in a book. And to minimize frowns, don't get worried. If your car gets scratched, just say cars get scratched. You know what? All these little things you get mad about in your life, if you added them all up by the end of your life, they're just nickels and dimes that don't really matter and don't have anything to do with what your life's about. But so why be bothered by them? So I decided I wouldn't be bothered by things, and I did very well for a long ways into my life. But now every time I do something right as a human and a machine doesn't understand me, doesn't work right, crashes, has a bug, that bothers me. Because it's people like me that created these things. Every computer will fail. Everything you have with a computer in it will fail. We should kill the people that brought us computers. That's how I feel sometimes. It's a joke. I know the press in this country loves to say that I'm saying it for real. But I changed my formula at one point in time. Steve Jobs, I put on some rock concerts when I went back to college. I had a plane crash and came out of amnesia 5 weeks later, and I phoned up Steve Jobs and said, this is my last chance to get my college degree. The Macintosh group's in good shape without me. And I went back under a fake name to Berkeley. So my Berkeley diploma says Rocky Raccoon Clark. And so anyway, but I was going to be the person who would still get the college degree someday. But I made up a formula. Steve Jobs said, I put on a rock concert. And Steve Jobs said, well, you're not music, you're computers. And I thought, well, you know what? Music and entertainment, fun in our lives is a big part of it too. The necessities of life, the fun, and the people. So I changed my formula to H equals F cubed. F is food, fun, friends. Food is a metaphor for the necessities of life. Food, fun, and friends. And I was being inducted into my high school Hall of Fame, and the kids started laughing, and I had to go into the microphone. I said, oh, there might be a fourth F. So anyway, pranks. But I played pranks with Steve Jobs, and I played pranks on him.
On a slightly more serious note, from the Pentagon Papers all the way through to Edward Snowden, there's a theme in the things you've said and in your book about Pentagon Papers, which we're probably the only two guys in this room old enough to remember, was when it was like a Snowden leak of papers about the Vietnam War and how it was being conducted, which you were terribly shocked by because it came as your dad had told you that America was the greatest country in the world, and suddenly you found it was lying. And the same thing goes all the way through to Edward Snowden. So that was a politically and psychologically important moment for you.
Well, you're expressing it correctly. It sure was. First of all, I was in college during the Vietnam War days, and I started listening and reading, and the way that war happened, none of it made any sense. The people wanted to be one country. We, the United States, had even signed an agreement that on a certain date they would become one country, and then we backed out against our word, and that war didn't make sense. And I was a student, and you could get drafted and have to fight in the war, or you could be a college student and protected from it. And I was a college student, but I sent in the wrong form. I sent in my grades instead of the form they wanted, and the San Jose Draft Board voted 5-3 to make me 1A eligible for the draft for 1 year. So in 1 year I might be called, and by then I was a pacifist. Somebody can shoot at me, that's fine, I will accept it. But I will not shoot at somebody else who's a person, who has friends, who tells jokes, who plays games, who is like me, a person in life. I just could never bring myself to do that. But you were not excused from the war for thinking that way. You could be called a conscientious objector and excused from fighting only if you went to a church. So I was probably going to, they were going to make me 1A wrongly, and I'd probably have to go to prison or Canada or whatever you do. And then they came out with a thing called the draft lottery. Every birthday would randomly get picked out of a hat and would determine the order which you will be called to be drafted. And I was eligible for 1 year to be drafted. And I got number 325 out of 366 birthdays. 325, good, I wouldn't get called. I'm off the hook. I've served my time, I've waited out my year. And within 1 week, the draft board sent me a letter granting me my student exception, my student deferment, which meant that in a later year they could make me 1A eligible for the draft for another year. Why would they do that? Why would a government do that to its people? I'd been brought up to think governments do things to help people, all solve problems and work together. So yeah, then the Pentagon Papers book came out, and it was a release by Daniel Ellsberg of a lot of documents from the CIA and the NSA or whoever they were, all the agencies in the US government. And then it also showed what the president was releasing to the press, and the story that we were reading in our newspapers was totally different than the truth. And that just shocked me, and I said, you know what, this political thing is not for me. I'm not going to vote, ever. It's just not going to matter to me in my life.
And that stayed with you?
What? Well, I never voted for anyone who could win. I voted for some strange candidates, but never anybody who could win.
Yeah, you voted for Ralph Nader and therefore effectively voted
Correct.
for George W. Bush.
Yes. Yeah, I voted for George W. Bush. Well, I really voted for Ralph Nader, and the pundits said that was a vote for George Bush because it was the people who voted for Ralph Nader didn't get to vote for Al Gore. It was a joke.
The leaks now, the Edward Snowden leaks, the Panama Papers we've had recently, these are all related to technology. So technology and the leaks seem to go together, but it works both ways. Obviously, technology can be used against the freedom of the citizen, or it can be used to liberate them.
The first time you ever saw the internet, oh my gosh, in my days it was very slow dial-up type stuff. Oh my gosh, all this information can be shared anywhere in the world. It's like there's a whole nother country of people socializing and in communication, and they don't have a country. They're just all on their own. It was such an ideal of freedom. You have something you want to say, you can say it, and never ever thought that this technology was going to actually make it better for the powers that control us to spy on us and know everything we're doing. I was brought up during the Cold War, and we were told in the United States we stood for freedom. What was the opposite of freedom? It was communism, where everybody's being spied on and searched on and reported by their neighbors, and if they're in certain activities, they might disappear and be put in secret jails. That's what I was brought up with, and I just think it's phony. Every country can be the same. Government has wealth and power. I wish they had a common sense and spent their money the way companies like Apple and Google do, and earned money instead of wasted it and had national debt. I mean, what is the national debt? We have $10 trillion in the United States, $100,000 per family, and they owe it. We all owe it, essentially, the national debt. Who do we owe it to? The purchasers of the national debt, the 1% at the top of the economic spectrum, and the Chinese.
So I've got a feeling you're going to vote for Bernie Sanders if you get the chance.
You know what? Bernie Sanders is a case where I would vote for a person who could win. Yeah, I like what he says. He talks a lot about more socialism, not 100% socialism, but there's a lot of things in the world. Many people, especially in business, like to point out examples where private enterprise is a lot more efficient and gets more done and more results than government, than socialization, let's say. And I think back, when I was young, we had a monopoly phone company in the United States, and I was taught that when you have a monopoly of a service that is essential, it has to be regulated so it doesn't take advantage of you and gouge you with prices. And the regulation of our phone company forced every single American with a home had to be able to get a phone wired to it at a certain price. Phone was essential. You had to be guaranteed a phone. Well, now I live in a part of Silicon Valley, the one part of Silicon Valley that, due to an antiquated, old, horrible phone company, is the one part of Silicon Valley you can't get broadband. So I've had 10 years with no broadband. I order an iTunes movie. It takes 7 hours to download. Many times my wife and I have driven 5 minutes to the Apple store in town and sat there from midnight till 6 in the morning downloading things as fast as we could. You can laugh, that's not a joke, that's true. But there's no regulation that says you have to have broadband, that it's an essential part of life. Many of us, I come from technology, so of course I believe it's essential. Broadband is essential. I can't live the modern life other people are living without it. So that's sad. So anyway, I don't know. We were talking about socialism, a little bit, some kind of words of socialism. Barack Obama was elected president, and one of his platforms was universal health care. I looked at all the countries of the world that have some universal health care. Basically, if you're there, you walk into a hospital and you get cared for, maybe not really well, but everyone has it. Barack Obama's plan was, if you don't buy insurance from private industry, you're a criminal. You are forced to buy insurance. That's universal health care? Well, we in the United States have the most privatized healthcare system of the modern developed world. We have the most privatized of all, and we have the highest cost and the lowest performance. And that one issue swamps every other example you can come up with.
Yeah. I gather doctors are the third biggest killer in America after heart disease and cancer. It's true.
Well, and also you talk about should university education be paid for as a government service? And a lot of people say, oh my gosh, it's not like, a lot of kids are for Bernie Sanders because, oh my gosh, our college debt will go away. We'll be able to go to college for free. When I went to college a long time ago in the state of California, if you went to a state college, it was almost free. And now it isn't. It's a huge problem. Well, some people say it's not really free. If somebody's paying for it, it has to be paid for. It's just a matter of how. And I think, well, you pay for my primary education, right? You don't do a very good job at it either. I get a certain number of years, certain dollars per person, and they have to go on a certain pace, and they don't get told you get to be educated till you're smart. But we have private, but anyway, primary education's paid for. Why not secondary education? Why not the university?
One very last question, because they're waving at me. One very last question. What are you doing now? Are you working on anything? Are you investing in stuff?
I'm doing an awful lot of speaking because I like motivating young people, but I'm involved with a technology company that I was involved with one that was getting rid of Our computers are no longer in our hands. We talk about the personal computer's gone. Now we have tablets and phones, and they aren't really computers. You don't sit down and write programs on them. You just display stuff that's being calculated on computers out in those big data centers, the unknown, unseen places called the cloud and the web, and they're out there somewhere, and they take all the data, process it, and tell our devices what to display. It's kind of neat. And Steve Jobs was a big person, very important in getting to this part of life that makes it so easy and wonderful. So our devices aren't really computers, but they're out there. Well, our company worked in the data centers, in the enterprise. You don't see this. You don't see this here. But we worked to sell them devices that would make everything work faster and simpler by using little chips with electrons that are super fast to replace hard disks for storage. And we were very successful. We went public. We grew very fast. The company was called Fusion.io. Well, now I'm with the same founders, and we're optimizing the storage in the data centers. And the company I'm with is called Primary Data. So I'm chief scientist there. And I'm also doing some other things on the side that I think are worth doing. I've had involvement before, like I said, in putting on rock concerts. I just brought Silicon Valley Comic-Con to San Jose, the largest attendance ever at the San Jose Convention Center. It was a great show. I met a lot of the great comic superhero celebrities, and it made me think a lot about what are superheroes. I got more power than Superman with my iPhone, I swear to God. So we all are now. So I'm doing that, and we're bringing Comic-Con to Tokyo also. So I've got my hands full. I'm busy, so busy. People just can't even believe it.
I think everybody in this room is very glad to hear it.
Good.
Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Wozniak.
Thanks.